And that makes me think about the kind of Groundhog Day descriptor that people are using for COVID times, right? Same day, some things are different. I know that in our house, we joke that like we don't know what day it is because there aren't the typical markers, that even weekends don't feel like weekends in the same way. And part of that for us, like the only thing that's constantly changing is our kid who's 5 months, right? So part of the struggle is we finally get into a rhythm and then he has a growth spurt and something changes. And so if we didn't have that, you know, it's one of those where we're not sure what that would look like. And in some ways that presents its own challenges, right? We finally get into a rhythm of naps. And then he's like, I'm going to drop a nap and not take long ones. And I'm like, cool, I'll figure out how to get work done. And yet it's the same and yet different week after week, that it's interesting. Like, how do we give language to experiencing something? It almost reminds me of a labyrinth, but not as peaceful or enjoyable, right? Where you're at the same spot, but in a different way, right? So I'm curious, how might we understand feelings and emotions, as well as just the fact that a lot of what we're feeling, like you said earlier on, is a constant state of fear, but in a different way and a different flavor each week when the world feels as daunting as it is. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. I can reiterate it differently, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. You know, who knows if the response will make sense at all. You know, we have 7 days in a week, and all of them are Blur's Day. And it's you know, I've shared with you, you know, my own what I called to other folks my own COVID breakdown about 2 weeks ago, and that sense that I woke up on a Tuesday morning and thought it was Friday. Went through my day and woke up on a Wednesday morning and thought it was Friday again, and then did the same on Thursday, and then Friday just wound up not even being that great of a day to anticipate. And you know, if it weren't for my electronic calendar, you know, I would have been waiting for my Friday appointments to show up all the time. And so this, what, you know, and I'm continuing to kind of reflect on that experience and reflect on what I'm learning from those moments. But one of the things that popped into my head as I was thinking about that was how much of our lives revolve around experience and event. How much we look forward to certain things, how much we depend on certain things to create a routine for us. So, you know, Sunday morning church. It's an event. It's an event that we can anticipate. It's, you know, as far as all of us are concerned, you know, Jesus instituted Sunday morning worship, and it's never changed since then. And they always met in person, and they always had a little red brick building with pews in it. That's where that happened. And so, you know, having those events, having a weekend be a weekend, and our capacity to set brackets around that space, or set it off as it's a separate container, really informs how we ritualize life. It informs how we rhythmically move in life. You know, a commute in the morning to work, getting up, getting ready, getting in a car, driving to a parking lot, parking in a particular space, and walking to a desk. You know, as much as we may think we do that rotely, we do it ritually. There's some intention behind it. Similar when we get, you know, when we pack up our desk at the end of the day and put our stuff in a briefcase and walk to our car and walk, you know, or get on the bus or do whatever it is we do to move from a workspace to a home space. those are rituals that we do over and over again with a certain kind of intent to mark and bracket space.
Mm.
And part of what this has done to us, and maybe even for us, is to blur those ritual spaces,
Mm.
those beginnings and those endings, those capacities to bracket. You know,
Mm.
to our family here, we had the privilege and luck to have one day be a going out to a restaurant day. Well, we
Mm.
haven't had that day as a family in 5 months.
Yeah.
And given anxieties about things and deliveries and other stuff, we didn't even order in for a long time either. And so that kind of threw off our rituals some, and ways that we would connect with other friends and ways that we would connect with one another. And so yeah, it becomes hard to punctuate the stories that we're living when it just feels like one big run-on sentence. We're in a Faulkner novel right now where there's one capital letter and 45 pages later there's a period and an end of a chapter. I always hated those books when they were assigned, because it's nice and neat when things are divided up into chunks. It's nice when you know what's going to go on in a paragraph, and the next paragraph's going to inform you of something new that's going on in the story. And there's just not that stuff there to create the story the way we're used to creating it.
Yeah.
And really, I think I'm still working it out, honestly. I'm still trying to figure out what that routine looks like, what actually is a weekend. There have been several instances, where I've said to myself, well, why don't I just plan that for Saturday because it doesn't matter? Why don't I just open client times on Saturday because it doesn't really matter when I see them? And if it doesn't matter to me, it probably doesn't matter to them. Same with our kids and trying to get routines started. I mean, it's been the hardest thing to get routines started with kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. And, one of them will spend all day reading a book and never leave her room, and the other one will spend all day on TV and never leave the couch if she could. And they would do that day after day, day in, day out, without some kind of routine or some kind of challenge. And 5 months in, and we're still trying to figure that out, especially with school coming up. And what does virtual school look like, and what do those routines look like, and what will be required of us? And again, that's a bracket time. If we want to think about it, culturally for us, August, September is a time that we bracket the end of summer and the beginning of fall because that's when school starts. But school's going to start and home is not going to change for many of us. My kids will be here. I'll just have slower bandwidth on my internet because they'll both be in virtual school all day, every day. And my spouse will be upstairs working all day, every day. And so, part of the thing that I've advocated for folks as a simple way of kind of bracketing things and giving ourselves a bracket is creating a commute. Even if you're continuing to work from home, it's what's the breakfast routine that's important to you? How can you actually walk outside your door, walk around the block, and come sit back at your desk, rather than take your breakfast down to your desk and just start working. Similar with the commute home. How do you leave the space? There was another therapist talking about it this morning. Every day, he, at the end of his day, closes his laptop, packs it up in a bag, packs up his work phone in a bag, and puts it away till the next day. doesn't look at it anymore. And that's his ritual for saying, okay, work day is over, it's family time now.
Mm-hmm.
And so a ritual for me is really nothing more than a habit that we do with intention. That is, we're present to it and we're intentional about it. And so part of this is, how do we get in the habit of being intentional around certain things? Whether it's a family movie night, whether it's watching church on Sunday in your pajamas, and or we have a ritual at Christmas that we cook a certain meal on Christmas morning. We've done it for the last 4 or 5 years, and there would be an uproar if we didn't do it again. But creating those things that we do with intention and with meaning to provide punctuation, to not live in the run-on sentence. Because we want to figure out life like a story. And we want to be able to tell the stories of our days. And when each day runs together, it's hard to have a new story, or even a different story. Or when everybody is seeing your story around you, it's hard to believe somebody might be interested in it, or that there's something interesting to tell. And so that capacity to create in our days some punctuation, some brackets, some commute space, some commute times, can hopefully help us navigate some of that blurring together of the lines. That week after I had a week of Fridays, I very intentionally got up on Saturday and said, this is Saturday. And on Sunday, I made sure, for me, woodworking has been my COVID hobby. And so I made sure on Sunday that I got out in the workshop and spent a few hours out there doing some work or challenging myself with a particular project. And then said, okay, Monday is coming up. This is what this is. And I try to vary my routines now. Is one of the things I'm learning as well. I used to always have clients on Fridays. I used to always have certain meetings on Wednesdays. So now I'll have a meeting on a Thursday afternoon, which was usually a pretty open day. And yesterday was pretty open, so I spent it in the wood shop, working on a desk for my daughter for her school starting up here. So little things that can throw a bit of a wrench into the habits that we have, so that when we come back, we can be intentional about the spaces that we enter. For me, that's what I'm experimenting with right now. Ask me next month and I may have 5 different things that I think or that I'm doing. But this situation requires great adaptivity of us in a time that feels really monotonous. And really, well, I'll take a step back here. Until we grieve what we've lost, we're going to be evading that opportunity to embrace what's in front of us. And so that capacity to acknowledge and feel what it is that we're feeling without being consumed by it, to embrace some of the changes that we've experienced, or at least to come up to them and say, wow, this is new. It's not pretty. I don't want to look at it much. But even the similar feels new. And that's been a lot of what I've been talking with pastors and clergy about is that, have you grieved? Have you experienced the loss of the routine, the Sunday morning worship, the way that worship was supposed to be, the way Jesus intended it all those many years ago, and the Tuesday morning staff meeting where everybody got donuts or somebody brought coffee and we all sat around the table and did our thing. You know, if you haven't grieved those things, then all we're going to do is long to repeat what we've lost in spaces that really need our creativity and our innovation and our adaptation. And we get stuck in those routines. And I don't want that for anybody, much less myself and my family. And so, you know, let's grieve. And out of grief, let's see what's shifted and changed and what we want to embrace and have become a part of that ritual of what life is for us, and what we want to say, yeah, you know, I'll do it for now, but once this is all over, I can do away with that. I can not have that anymore. Be okay with that.
One of the things that you were saying made me think of how folks want to go back to normal, right? And that most folks, when I hear them say that, I also acknowledge that normal's not going to happen in the ways that they would like. And so I wonder if a better phrase would be, I need to grieve what I had considered to be normal and figure out how to be present in this constant state of adjusting so that a new normal, whatever that may be, whatever normal newness is, can happen. And, you know, I was trying to think as you were saying, what are the punctuation marks throughout the week? And I was thinking back, and for us, because our kids so little and constantly changing, ours are having to constantly change. You know, at first it was that we would go for an evening walk at this time because he was still so little, constantly sleeping through the day. You didn't have to pay attention to his routine. And then we started getting into a colic season, and there was no punctuation, and we just ached for something other than colic. And then by the grace of formula shift, there was an end to colic. And then it was Friday night pizza. And then I was like, I got to work on my mom Sunday morning breakfast game. Like, I want my kids' friends to be like, oh, we're going to the Fletcher's house because she makes homemade donuts. So I've learned how to make homemade donuts. Or, you know, the things that you're like, what can I use post-COVID? As well as being able to, but I loved what you said, like, how can we use it not to ignore this time or just wish it away, but to mark this time? And I think being able to mark this time is something that we really need to figure out how to practice more, because if all we do is wish it away, one of my cousins shared something like, when COVID's over is starting to sound like when I win the lottery, right? Like, it's this big aspiration that you don't believe is going to happen. And so if we're wishing this thing away, we wish part of our life away.
Right.
And yet, what would it look like to be able to find those punctuation marks, to be able to find those things that allow ritual or meaning, if nothing else, even if it doesn't happen regularly, like to find meaning in the ways that we mark things. So I really appreciate that framework also as to why Groundhog Day feeling happens, right? And, you know, there's the ability also to acknowledge that what you needed, like you said, what may work for me this week may not work for me next week. And I know Ian and I have had conversations around, like, when we would have a couples check-in, it could last like for a while, for a distinct season. Like, there wasn't a whole lot changing, there wasn't a whole lot happening. And now for us, because our kid, we can mark the pandemic because it's how old our kid is. Like, our kid has only known pandemic life, and we have only known pandemic parenting. And so it was one of those of being able to realize what worked before. And this was a real tension for he and I early on, because I'd be like, that's not working anymore. And he's like, wait, but we just talked about it last week. Like, why is it not working? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just telling you, I know it's not working and we need to figure something out. And I think that's the other struggle, is what once worked for relationships, or what once worked for natural buffers in relationships, have shifted.
Right.
And so being aware that we're in a season that we may not have, I use the phrase, I don't have a file, or I don't have a box for that. I don't have a previous experience to understand what's going on. And none of us do. None of us have lived through a pandemic. We're
Right.
actively learning and being able to cope and process. And so I think being able to understand that we're also so marked by these daily or weekly transitions that haven't happened, to be able to say, okay, what could, and see it, as you previous said, you know, an empathic imagination to a daily imagination. Like, how can we be creative? How do we see this as an open canvas of creatively engaging, knowing that this is going to be a while, and seeing how that might shift our fight, flight, freeze, or appease modes to reacting, right? And being able to see it differently, knowing that school this year is going to look,
Oh, yeah.
who knows, right? And we think we know, and then it may change. And how do we process when things are continually changing?
Right.
And finding those markers, I think, is helpful.